One of the big themes in Paul's theology is union with Christ. You've written a book on this, and tell me about union with Christ in Colossians. Maybe where do you find it, and maybe something about what does it mean? It's a phrase that's thrown around a lot, but what does Colossians teach us about what union with Christ means?
Um, well, it overlaps with what Paul says elsewhere, and we certainly get it as I mentioned to you in verse 6, as you therefore receive Christ Jesus the Lord, so walk in Him. So you're in some way you're walking in union with Christ, um, and then this concept continues. We saw it in chapter 2 and verse 9, where it says, "For in him all the fullness of deity dwells in bodily form, and in him you have been made full." And so we could just stop right there and realize that what Christ became at his ascension in terms of his messianic personhood, not his deity, he became an escalated priest. He became an escalated king. And he became an escalated temple. Remember, even in the Gospels, the temple functions begin to revolve around him, not bringing sacrifices in the temple. He is the one who offers forgiveness based on his upcoming sacrifice at the cross. So he's the center of the temple now, as well as the priests. And so chapter 2 and verse 10 is good in the sense that one of the things Christ became in an escalated, consummated way at his ascension was the temple. And so verse 9 says, for in him all the fullness of deity dwells in bodily form, and in him you come into union with him. So you are experiencing that presence of God in the temple. So what happens is when we come into union with Christ, uh, we are identified with what he's identified with when he ascended in terms of the climax of his messianic personhood. Likewise, we become escalated priests because we're in union with Christ. We become kings because we're in union with Christ. And it's with the ascended Christ. So, in fact, in my book, Union with the Resurrected Christ, I talk about around 20 things that we become identified with Christ with. And now that word union, what does that mean? I think we could probably look at it from different vantage points. One is just general identification. Another would be mystic union in the sense just as husbands and wives become one, and that's a mystery. How much more is it a mystery that believers become one with Christ? We're the bride, he's the bridegroom. So there's something about a union that is not fully understandable. There's that mystic union, and on analogy, best perhaps with the husband-wife relationship. And we could also look at union from the vantage point of corporate solidarity or representation, where Christ represents us, especially in terms of the narrative of his life. He died, we were seen as dying. He rose, we were seen as rising. Back then, even before we existed. And so Paul will say that, for example, in Colossians 2, in verse 20, if you've died with Christ to the elementary principles of the world, why, as if you're living in the world, do you submit yourself to decrees, etc.? And then he goes on in chapter 3, if you've been raised up with Christ, keep seeking the things above. And then verse 3, if you have died and your life is hidden with Christ in God. Now, there's another one. It's the concept of union, hidden with Christ. Even the word with is a union word. Verse 4, when Christ, who is our life, is revealed, then you'll be revealed with him in glory. And so there's a beautiful example. If you're truly a believer, you come into union with Christ, then you were seen as also being identified and part of the narrative of his past life, his death, and his resurrection. So those are some examples and some aspects of union. When Christ dies on the cross, for example, if we just focus on representation, because the historical narrative of Christ involves some subtleties. He died as he's our representative, so we were seen as dying. He rose as our representative, and we're seen as rising. He was our corporate representative. And so, therefore, when you think of the imputation of his death, the penalty of sin, he took the penalty of our sin so that we don't have to take it. That's imputed to us, not guilty. But also, what's imputed to us is his righteousness that he worked throughout his life. And that's credited to us, or we could even say attributed to us, as your colleague in systematic theology likes to say. So, which I think is a fine word. Yeah, those are some aspects of it. And a lot of this just overlaps with what Paul says elsewhere. I don't think there's anything too unique, because even elsewhere in First Corinthians and Second Corinthians, Ephesians, we get the notion of a union with Christ as that's related to the temple, for example, or as that's related to our being identified with his death or to his resurrection. So,
And what's the name of your book? Is Union with the Resurrected Christ, right?
yes,
So
yeah,
I'll put a link to that in the video.
Baker Bookhouse, yes.
Yeah. Well, I think we're probably, Greg, close to time. Anything else you want to say?
So, I mean, I would mention and refer people if they're interested in the notorious circumcision baptism issue in Colossians 2, that I would direct them to my commentary to see that. It would have taken perhaps an inordinate amount of time to cover that in a podcast, but I would direct people to that section. And I do think that my conclusion in it is that baptism is the equivalent of Old Testament circumcision. But the way I get there takes a while to explain.
Well, for those interested, this is Greg's commentary here, Colossians and Philemon, Baker exegetical commentary on the New Testament. And let's see how many pages this is. It's going to be 483. No, not counting the indexes. Over 500 pages, it looks like, with indexes. So that is a thorough, detailed discussion of Colossians for those interested in going further. So, Greg, thanks for taking time to talk with me today about Colossians.
Sure, glad to do so.